Now, clearly, of course, our interest here is about lesson observation, of course, and about OFSTED, and about grading criteria. And some of our panel, of course, in our presentations this morning, were touching upon these themes. And let me pick up some of what was said this morning, of course, as I pass along. But our title here is, Are Lesson Observations Missing the Point? And you might ask yourself, what is the point? What was the point I'm driving at? And the point essentially is, we do not appear to be improving teaching and learning. As the years pass on, we're not improving teaching and learning. There's no significant lift, basically, in teaching and learning grades since 2001, when OFSTED first started to enter the college sector. We've got to ask ourselves questions about that, as to why that might be the case, and how we can improve lesson observation and get it to do the job that it ought to do to lift and improve teaching and learning. If you want to help your staff to really focus upon learning instead of just teach performance, try to get them to pose those three questions when they're writing their lesson plans. What do I want them to learn? So as a teacher, I'm posing the question, what do I want them to learn? What's the clarity of that? What's the sharpness of that when I walk into this room? What do I want them to learn? Secondly, how will they all learn it? Secondly, how will they all learn it? And thirdly, how far and to what extent have they all learnt it? So by the end of my lesson, how do I know they've all learnt it? Because inspectors are still reporting. You will get a teacher here at the front who's full of passion and enthusiasm about Bismarck's foreign policy, but they haven't stood still even once to check the progress in the room, to check the learning in the room, and to really drive and develop it. Only 56% of lessons are being judged good or outstanding. And we have this decline, basically, and for the second year running, no college is judged outstanding for teaching and learning. Here's some data just to ponder about how far we're making progress, if anything. OFSTED brought in their new inspection framework on the 19th of June 2012, and I'm sure you've read it backwards and sideways and frontways, basically, and digested all of it. And it is a much more slimmed down inspection framework. I do like it. It is sharper and to the point. And it is true that they put teaching, learning and assessment right at the core, right at the heart of those judgments. 60% with no improvement. 60% of colleges showing no improvement, despite, in theory, 4 years of greater effort and application internally to step forward. 60% no noticeable improvement. And for independent learning providers, it's 68%. For adult and community learning, it's 69%. And for work-based learning, it's 57%. And the overall average of those figures is 53% good or better. So you can see to some extent where OFSTED's coming from. Of course, this presupposes you accept their judgments. Now, again, when you look at the data here, 61% hitting good or better, and you can see the rest of the figures for yourself. Those figures are still quite low, aren't they? You're perhaps well aware that the national average since 2001 has hovered around 62%, 63%, maybe 65% some years, good or better. And what's typical in many of our colleges is that our internal teams are reporting averages of 75, 80% good or better. You do have this big credibility gap between the internal lesson observation team and the external inspectors coming in. Now, here we have, of course, OFSTED's new framework for teaching, learning and assessment. And there we have the dominant bullet points which govern those inspection judgments. And although, of course, we hear lots of criticism of OFSTED nationwide, I've not heard anyone say that those bullet points are incorrect, or they are wrong, or that those judgments should not be made. I think, in a sense, we agree. I think academic opinion would agree with OFSTED that those bullet points are fairly sound and fairly secure in terms of what good practice might revolve around. We might disagree on how it's interpreted and how the grading decisions are made, but I think the fundamental base of what we regard as good practice is certainly there. So we see this big focus as a much more holistic inspection framework, much more holistic view of teaching and learning, not just the observed evidence of the lesson itself, but this wider overview of initial assessment, of equality and diversity, of embedding, of course, functional skills, of your VLE and how you support learners on your VLE and stretch and challenge on the VLE for extended learning. So a much more holistic view of teaching and learning than just simply the evidence of the actual observed lesson itself. Inspectors, of course, famously start the inspection from the car park, the whole way through the foyer and down the corridor and into your classroom, and they're reading everything they see on the notice boards. Where is the vibrancy and the excitement of further education, and where this career path could lead me to, and what the future might hold? Our colleges are portals to perhaps a better way of life. If I lived in a deprived community, do I have those high expectations that despite the deprivation outside these college walls, if you come in here, you work with us, you might achieve, and here's what you might become of you in the future? We've got to have that vibrant edge, I think, as strongly as possible. And certainly we are looking for that to be present in all that we do. OFSTED are certainly very keen to state that you and I do not teach classes. We teach groups of individuals who all happen to be in the same room. And every individual is very different, of course, in terms of their backgrounds and their interests and the progress they made at high school and their career paths and their ambitions and their home support and all of these wider factors. And of course, all of these wider factors have a great bearing upon the progress I make, of course, through your college. And so they're right to say that you should know something about my background. You know, I would focus more on your initial assessment procedure. How sound and secure is that at capturing me and capturing my background? What do you know about me, essentially? And sometimes it's a little bit shallow in many of our colleges. We do our diagnostic testing, and you've got my numeracy result and my literacy result and something about my IT, and you know my GCSE pass rates from high school, but sometimes it stops there. Interestingly, when you do all the academic research into this, the greatest determinant of the progress a student will make through our education system is the highest qualification of the mother. Quite interesting, isn't it? The highest qualification of the mother. So I guess it'd be a bit pointed, wouldn't it, in your initial assessment questionnaire to say, and what qualifications does your mum have? You know. I do a training course called Outstanding Teaching and Learning, and I use what I call the Diamond Lesson Plan model, of course, supporting that. And the final step of my lesson plan is the word bridge, and the word bridge is a bridge to the next lesson. Here's what I'd like you to do between now and the next lesson. And I'm going to coach and encourage you basically to dive in some independent research and some learning outside this classroom. Because it stands to reason the student who does more for themselves outside this room is the student who will be a higher achiever than the student who does nothing further after they leave this lesson. So basically, if we want to regard, of course, requires improvement as a deficiency model, and I guess to some extent it is, if I say something requires improvement, something is lacking, something is missing, then the question is, what is missing? And this goes to the nub of how we perhaps need to try and raise performance, of course, in our colleges. Because inspectors don't have to tell you how to improve your lesson. They say it's grade 3, they say it's grade 2, but they'll not give you detailed feedback of what was missing and, in their view, what would actually lift and improve this lesson. They'll give you some very brief comments on your doorstep, but nothing in a sense really works for you, I don't think. I was speaking to a college principal in Liverpool there just last week, and it's not the first time I've heard the remark. But he had the lead inspector there giving feedback to the senior management team after their inspection. And he said, look, we'd welcome some guidance here. We're not getting enough outstanding practice in our college. You're the lead inspector. What makes an outstanding lesson? What makes it outstanding? And the lead inspector replied, it makes the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. And that's about as far as the advice and information went. And they were very dischuffed by that response. And although they didn't say so, you see, I think they should have said so. I think they should have pressed a wee bit further and said, but, unpack it for me a wee bit beyond that. Now, I'd apply the same criticism to our internal lesson observers. That quite often they struggle too to articulate what the gap was between this grade 3 judgment I'm giving you today and what would clearly make it grade 2 or what would lift it up to grade 1. I think we've got too much mystery around it. We see it as too abstract a quality, and I think we can pin it down into clear stepping stones that would lift and improve practice. I think we crave that. I think we want that. Every teacher I meet on the road always says to me, is there a video showing grade 1 in action? Can we see a video with a teacher doing grade 1? What is grade 1? You know, kind of touch it. What's it look like? Is it tangible? Not only what requires improvement, but how to improve. We do have to address that. And if we can't address that, as Jeff Petty was saying, all we are doing is just measuring all the time. We're just measuring all the time. And we're not actually leading to beneficial improvement. Now, this is why I think we've stood still for the past 10 years, because our internal lesson observers are not crossing that line into being coaches. What is the teaching strategy you recommend in your college? How do I approach teaching and learning? Do you have a model for it? Do you have an approach to it? Do you say that it's so abstract, it's simply up to the individual? It's so abstract we can't pin it down. We can't actually give you sharp, clear guidance on how to start your lesson, how to develop learning, how to assess people, how to close it down at the end. The nearest we get sometimes is just our 3-part lesson plan, of course, start, middle and end. And we do have a body of evidence now. We know what works in teaching, learning and assessment. And of course, he's done the education world an enormous favour, has Hattie, by managing to trawl through all the academic research, of course, in effective teaching and learning in the English-speaking world, and drawing it all together, condensing and isolating what appears to work. And of course, we tend to have this top 10 from Hattie, and I'm sure you're alert to his research. And if you haven't got his textbook there, Visible Learning, on your shelf, then make sure you get a copy of Visible Learning on your shelf. And of course, he's gone through, of course, and ranked, of course, the most effective strategies that drive effective practice in teaching and learning. And I think all of us, in terms of our lesson observation teams, in terms of our management of colleges, we should be alert to these very positive factors that drive and deepen learning and assessment across our colleges. And I think all too often there is a credibility gap there, that we don't know this sort of stuff. We don't appear to know it. We don't appear to have it at our fingertips. There's still enough sharing, in my view, of what works. And we're still not getting enough staff meetings where teaching and learning is on the agenda. And to me, it has to be very simple stuff. Like even you've got a 10-minute agenda item on good Q&A techniques. And I'm saying to you, as a staff, next Tuesday at the staff meeting, all arrive, at least 1 or 2 of your favourite Q&A techniques. You know is effective, you know works. And if there's 10 of us in this staff meeting, we all come with 2 each. We've now got 20 good Q&A techniques. Then we dip into the research, we dip into the educational publications, and we build a reservoir of 20, 30, 40, 50 good Q&A techniques. And now all of a sudden, as a young teacher in your college, you're handing me something that's very, very useful to me, because I only know what I know, but now you're handing this rich list of 50 tried and tested Q&A techniques. And then when I write my lesson plan, I'm going to discipline myself, not just put Q&A in the assessment column, but I'm going to name the Q&A technique I'm actually going to use. And it forces me to have a wider repertoire of technique over time and to think it through. Now, take that principle through for recap activities, for good websites and so on. And we need to empower our teaching teams to grow good practice. They shouldn't have to feel it comes externally from a consultant or from OFSTED or somebody else parachuting into their sort of like college for a day. We have the expertise in this team. Let's flatter the team that is true, that exists, and let's grow that expertise out of the team. And then when we feel that we're not good at something, then of course let's ask ourselves how we get CPD to plug that gap. Whatever deficiency we think as a team we need help with or support with to be better at some aspect of teaching and learning. I'll come as an end point, of course, that teams should write their own teaching and learning strategy, but a practical document, not just the entitlement document. There are too many of these strategy documents that I read in colleges, which are just a list of bullet point entitlements, but they don't actually tell you in practical terms how to put it into action. It's about getting the balance right, isn't it, between the data and the measurement side, and about the quality, of course, of what we actually try to do and achieve. Now, we start from that base and we move through, of course, and at the top end of this, we reach, of course, being self-sustaining. We are an autonomous system, essentially. We have confident curriculum teams who know what outstanding practice looks like, and they reinforce each other. They disseminate to each other. They don't need outsiders to come in and tell them how to teach psychology or history or brickwork or carpentry or hairdressing. They know exactly what good practice looks like. And they become self-governing and setting their own high standards. And for new teachers joining their team, they induct that new teacher into their standards. Here's how we teach and learn. Here's how we do it. Here we believe is good practice, and we'll welcome your contribution to that. But I think we do need to have active teaching and learning strategies that mean something. And here's my acronym. You might think there's enough acronyms in teaching and learning without another one to join it, but the impact strategy. And I think when you analyse a lot of what we're trying to achieve and do in teaching and learning, then nice statements here for impact say quite a bit. So, of course, inspire. How do you inspire your students to be the best they can be and to go forward as far as they can? So the setting of the milestones, all of the target setting for our students to make sure, of course, they are making progress and it's measurable. The planning for learning side in terms of all of the schemes of work and our lesson planning, our initial assessment documentation, that it's sound and secure and does the job that it ought to. The assessment for learning being at the core of our lessons. This diagram, by the way, is not in your training booklet because I didn't put everything in there. But the assessment for learning is at the core of what we do, and staff appreciate what's meant by that phrase, and goes back to all of that literature that I've just referred to on screen, all of that research of what works in the academic world. The core skills just shorthand for all of the functional skills and all of the employability skills. That's clearly embedded and developed across our system. And finally, of course, this empowerment of the teaching team, that we invite them to tell us what is best practice in teaching engineering, what is best practice in teaching hairdressing, and so on. And we contribute to that, we help them with that, but we help them to build their own teaching and learning strategy to the point where they'll publish a short, snappy document, best practice in teaching engineering, or whatever it might be. And that lends confidence to a teaching team. It's not always people imposing their views and their standards upon them, but it has to be soundly based then, of course, upon good academic evidence. I don't want to get too hooked in this business about we can't measure good practice, which appears to be a recurring theme. It's interesting, isn't it, because we constantly measure our students. And our whole examination system is, you've got a grade A, you've got a grade B, you've got a grade C. So it all depends how it's implemented, as perhaps you're both saying in different ways. And in some colleges it might be a bit more of a punitive regime, where people do feel crushed and destroyed by that grade, but you've got a warmer world there of support and development, and we will lift you up, and that's how it ought to be. But equally, it is refreshing for all of us to know. And of course, we've known this for years, or you should have known it for years, that OFSTED have never ever insisted on graded lessons. They've never insisted upon it. We just ended up mimicking them, because obviously inspectors had a graded system. Really all we're saying is learning is at the heart of it, of course, and we've heard reference to this fixed mindset from the panel this morning, that too many of our students haven't got the self-belief. They believe they're no good at maths. They've got a fixed mindset, I'm no good at maths, and they can't really shift themselves. And that's the importance of formative feedback, to show you how to step forward and improve your ability in maths. And then we invite them to self-assess against criteria that we give them to mark their own work against, and their ability and their confidence starts to rise. And eventually we get to what these psychologists refer to as metacognition, where I'm self-governing on my own standards. I know the progress I'm making. I know I'm not so hot at, and I'm seeking support and guidance to build and go further and better. Okay, thanks indeed for listening.